chairing this session is, and also reading his paper with me, Amir Ali Mujiam. He has requested me that he will read his own, he'll talk about himself before he presents his paper. And also in this session we have Professor Anisul Rahman. Anisul Rahman is formerly a professor and head Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, a Central University in New Delhi, and is currently Senior Advisor at Rekta Foundation, the world's largest website on Urdu language, literature and culture. He has worked and published in the areas of literary translation and post-colonial literatures. Apart from more than 70 papers in books and journals, he has to his credit 3 books authored by him, 4 edited volumes and a collection of modern Urdu poetry in English translation, 2 comprehensive volumes of Urdu poetry from the late 16th century to the present times in English translation, and 2 collections of critical essays on translation studies and South Asian studies are scheduled to appear shortly. Dr. Rahman has been a Shastri Fellow at the University of Alberta, Canada, and a visiting scholar at Purdue University, USA. I welcome you, Professor Rahman. Ms. Fariba Wafi. First collection of short stories came in 1996, followed by a collection of 22 short stories titled Even When We Were Laughing. Her first novel, My Word, came out in 2002 and won the award for top novel from the Goldshill Foundation and Yalda Literary Award later in the same year. It also picked up accolades from Meheregan Award and Isfahan Literary Award. My Word is already on its 23rd reprint. This novel has been translated into English, Italian, German and Kurdish, Sorani and Turkish. Her other publications are Tarlan, The Dream of Tibet, A Secret in Alice, On the Way to the Villa, The Moon is Getting Full, After the End, Without Wind, Without Gore is her last book, which was published in 2016. Some of her short stories have been translated into Russian, Japanese, Swedish, Turkish, Arabic, etc. I welcome you, Ms. Fariba Wafi, and now I request Amiti to speak a few words about himself before he reads his paper.
Well, hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'm quite honored to be here amongst the scholars and the students in the Academy. I sincerely thank the Academy members, the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, the officials, and also the Iranian Cultural House for their invitation. Just a few words about myself. I teach English literature and literary theory at Shahid Beheshti University in Tehran. My major area of interest is modern literature. I also teach arts, especially criticism of arts, cinema. I'm especially interested in Abbasi Kiarostami cinema and other contemporary filmmakers. The subject of my study, my topic today, the talk I'm going to give today is called Representation of Women in Iranian Literature of Diaspora. Now, I want to focus on a genre, and an emerging genre, I would say, in Iranian literature, which is called diasporic or diaspora literature. You as Indian scholars know that you are more familiar with the notion of diaspora and immigration because of your history, but in Iran this is not a very long-standing tradition. I have given a very short let's say, history of modern Iranian literature of diaspora to you. When I say modern, because before 100 years ago, one could consider travel writing as kind of diasporic. Blind Owl wrote part of it and also published it in India, here. For first time. And in a way, they seem to have a long-standing relation with abroad, outside the country. And in that sense, one could consider them as a particular kind of diasporic literature. The third period of diasporic literature, in my opinion, starts in the 1980s to 1990s. And this is the post-revolution diaspora literature. We witness writers who were in exile or who immigrated abroad after revolution, and their major tendency in writing was writing about the nostalgia of the past. So they were very much nostalgic about the memories of the past, and we also witness memoirs in this period, especially amongst women writers. And this is the moment that I would like to stress upon. From the 1980s onwards, we witness a new group of writers emerging in Iran after revolution. And these are women writers who start to write. Before the revolution, we only had a handful of Iranian female writers, but after revolution, we had a great tendency for women to write. The fourth period, in my opinion, starts from the 2000s onwards up to now. Now, this time, these new young women do not just talk nostalgic about the past or write just memoirs. They talk about their dilemmas, the complications of diaspora. More importantly, the new Iranian woman is trying to find a new identity in a new emerging world. And perhaps this becomes, as far as I'm concerned, the major focus of diasporic literature. Now, after this very, very short history, let's go into the major argument. Now, experience of immigration is different for people with different age groups, with different social classes, and also gender types, in my opinion. The hypothesis of my talk is that diasporic experience is different for a woman in comparison with a man. You know, when a woman immigrates, even with the same family, she feels different. And this is the focus of my work. Now, I have two case studies. For the shortage of time, I just briefly read a few words from these books. The first one is a collection of short stories by a very, very famous Iranian writer called Goliye Taraqi. She wrote a book called Khaterehay Parakande, in English, Scattered Memories. This is my first case study, and the second one belongs to a very young girl, young woman, who is born in 1995 or 6, I think. So she's like 22 or 23. She belongs to a very, very new generation of women in Iran called Sepide Siyavashi, and the book is called Farsi Bekhand, Laugh in Farsi. Now, the diasporic experience and notion of womanhood or female identity could be studied from different angles. The first one, I think we couldn't really forget the fact that diasporic experience always uses metaphors from female metaphors, let's put it this way. The very first and foremost metaphor is motherland. When we immigrate to a country, we always talk about our own land as motherland. And sometimes our grandmother, in the sense of having a much more tradition. Grandmother's house is usually a metonymy of life, of home, let's put it this way. More interestingly, in Farsi, we have a word called namus for our homeland. And it's very interesting that namus in Farsi has female connotations. It means honor but it also means chastity and means kind of a woman that is always protected in a patriarchal society by men. So it's namus, you have to protect your namus. So in that sense, that has another meaning as well. I would very much like to read a few lines from the very beginning of the story by Goliye Taraqi called Scattered Memories, which is called Grandmother. Now, it's very interesting that in this story, she talks about her grandmother and the fact that how, when she used to live in grandmother's house, she says, when I was, this is the beginning of the story, she says, on Thursdays when my school used to finish, I used to go home and hold my grandmother's skirt and stay with her. Her warmth, the warmth of her breasts were the only thing I remember from the old age. The breasts of my grandmother there. It shows how much a woman who is now living in Paris is really longing for grandmother in the sense of, her home, her homeland. The second, I need to move very fast, the second one is about how in the new society, when a woman moves from her homeland to another land, in a new society, new power relations start to emerge. And in fact, again, Taraqi has a very interesting story called Madame the Wolf. Madame the Wolf is about a woman, a French neighbor, who is acting like a wolf to other people in the house by saying that everyone should be quiet. This story is a fantastic story about a family, a single parent family. There is no father here. We have only a mother who lives with two young kids in Paris. She has moved from a very large aristocratic house in Tehran to a very, very small apartment in Paris. She has to adjust herself to this new situation, and of the story is wonderful. The story, I have just translated it for you. She says, all of us, me and my kids and friends who visit us now and then, are afraid like a dog from the downstairs neighbor. Life in exile in Paris is accompanied by hidden anxieties and a sense of guilt from the fact that the foreigner has come from overseas and has taken the place of the natives. A sense of apology and obligatory withdrawal and silence, anger that has no way to express itself. A sense of internalized humiliation that stings and is waiting for compensation. And a sense of pride that has its roots in the 2,500 years. And a look from above with doubt and sarcasm that is looking at the consequences of civilization and modernization. And a sense of trust that we, the grandchildren of Kurosh and Dariush, even in the moment of failure, misery, and decadence, are better than everyone. Why? God only knows. Now, this is a very, very interesting starting point of a story about new power relations. Now, this woman who has moved to Paris doesn't know French very well. So whenever this neighbor, Madame de Wolf, knocks at their door and talks about the fact that they should be kept quiet, they shouldn't go to the balcony, they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't wear shoes at home, and etc., etc., she cannot really say anything. And the whole life becomes a torture. At the end of the story, she at one of these moments, she starts screaming at this woman in Farsi and English that she knows much better than French. And all of a sudden, she realized that she could change the power relations in this whole story. And that's about basically the story. Now, the next concept, as far as I'm concerned, is the concept of women writing, especially autobiographical writing. Before revolution, we didn't have much of women autobiographical writings, but after revolution, we had hundreds. And I'm not exaggerating. In fact, some of these autobiographies are just in the form of essays. They might not be in the form of books, but hundreds of autobiographical pieces. I would like to introduce you to a book which is published in the US, University of Arkansas has published it, called Let Me Tell You Where I've Been. And this is just a glimpse of writings by women writers, Iranian women writers who write in English at the moment around the world, and this is a compilation of their works. So we see that at the moment we have a new voice for women all around the world, something that we didn't have before. The next issue is the issue of a change in female identity. I would say that at the moment, Iranian diasporic literature by women is more concerned with the notion of self-discovery. The new woman is not nostalgic about the past. She's searching for what they really do not know much about the new womanhood. They are confronting with the modern woman of different countries, different worlds, etc. Especially with the global village phenomenon, they see people around the world. Now, what happens to these women? Again, Goli Taraqi has a story called A House in Heavens, which is about a story of a mother whose family immigrated, one by one, they immigrate to different parts of the world. And they even sell the house. So she basically, literally, becomes homeless. And she has to move, she moves to her daughter's house in Paris. There is no place to sleep even in that small apartment. She's pushed back to the son's apartment in London. She lives there again, but again there is no space there. The son's house, they have a dog, big dog in a small apartment. She's not used to living with a dog in an apartment in Iran and all that. And eventually she is even forced to go to Canada to live with her brother. And on the journey from London to Canada, she starts to get a very, very bad illness, and eventually she dies in Canada. It's a very, very moving story of what happens to a woman, especially a mother, in the time of immigration or diaspora. I want to finish my talk with a final word. Iranian literature of diaspora creates a new platform from which Iranian women write about their evolving identity and the challenges they face and the opportunities they gain in the brave new world of modernity. So in a way, it is good news and bad news. There are definitely certain challenges ahead, but at the same time, there are things to gain. I would like to finish my talk with a short poem by an Iranian woman called Persis M. Karim, who is a professor of English and comparative literature at San Jose State University in the US. The poem is called Let Me Tell You Where I've Been. Now, I've met Persis myself. She has not actually been to Iran at all. She's born in the US. Her father was Iranian, Mr. Karim, and her mother was French. But it's very interesting that in this poem she tries to imagine how would it be, the homeland. And I think that it's very interesting how a woman tries to reconstruct the notion of homeland in her poetry. Some have stamps in their passports, emblems of official entry. But the places charted on this invisible map are etched softly in the curve of my spine. Some women go deaf with the sound of children crying and weep at the thought of more togetherness. And I keep looking for a way to belong. When you have traveled far, you begin to long for that particular thing. The sweet mustiness of a childhood room, the mix of cumin and freshly chopped parsley, the dull but knowable color found in the joining of four walls. Conversations about children and deaths have detoured this longing. Still, I want to speak names of places with worn roads and blue-domed mosques. Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan. Places I want to say I've been. I want to say I've been. I keep the box of inlaid enamel and wood, its pattern of irregular triangles and stars, the lid that fits a little too tightly, purchased at a crowded bazaar. I carry it with me like a passport, not from this place where I was born, but from the other I think I have been. Thank you very much.
Fine paper. And I would now request Manisha to move his presentation.
Friends and fellow travelers, a very good afternoon to you all. First of all, I should like to thank Akademi for this occasion, where we have often been talking of one literature, but here we are talking of two literatures together, and there are many points of affinity and comparison that one can think of. So from this point of view, especially this seminar gains in its own value. It's not quite often that we have such occasions when we can compare and we can sit together to discuss two cultures and two literary texts together. You just had one glimpse of it, but actually the kind of seminar that we have here, and when I got the concept note, the promise made was very, very huge. Huge in the sense that it says contemporary story writing in India and Pakistan, but when I went later, when I saw the entire program, I found that there were so many things being covered. Travel writing was there, and translations were there, and stories were there, and fiction was there. So a lot of things were being discussed. So what they gave me was to talk about the current situation, the contemporary situation. My title was, say, for example, contemporary trends in Indian fiction. So when you talk of fiction, you have short story also in hand as well as the novel. So I thought I was in C, and it was very difficult for me to decide what to do. And especially when you talk of Indian writing. We are a multilingual nation, we speak so many languages, we write in all these languages, so deciding on which language, literature, which language one is going to speak about was quite a decision. So what I ultimately did, and what I am going to very briefly present before you, is to give you an account to help you understand what has been the current trends in the writing of Indian English fiction, with a special reference to the novels that I have written. Having said that, let me go to my presentation very briefly. When you talk of contemporary trends, or when you talk of the modern age, this you cannot construct unless you go back to the past. So there has to be a tradition in order to develop what has been happening now or what is to happen in future with reference to the present and the past. So keeping in mind the three time scales, the past that has been, the present in which we are, and this gives you a direction to the future that could possibly be. So I fixed my focus on that, and for a very brief moment I will talk to you about the tradition of Indian fiction that really emerged and which ultimately brought the fiction that we have today in hand. and that also points towards the fiction that we might have tomorrow, and the road seems to be quite clear. So, if you talk of Indian literature, basically it is a literature of a little more than 100, Indian literature in English I mean, it's a little more than 150 years old. And I say so because the novel came much later, 1930s onwards, if you take an account of it. And I'm trying to present before you a graph of how this whole thing developed before I come to the modern fiction writing, the current trends that have happened. So a literary tradition that emerged is a spread of about, say, a little more than 150 years. And the first novel that comes before us is Raj Mohan's Bankim-Chand Chatterjee. It's very important novel, historically very important. Interestingly, this novel in 1864 was serialized in a journal, and after that it was not published. It was as late as 1935 that this novel was published. So if you start thinking of the evolution of Indian novel, it is not 1864, because only a few readers could read that. It is 1935 from where we can see how it has evolved really and has come into our hands and it is now. So it's a big jump. From there, from 1935 we count, and 1864 it was written and published in series. The very important hallmark comes to us. The very interesting thing about Indian fiction is this, that it matured at the very beginning. Three major writers come on the scene: R.K. Narayan, Raja Rao, and Munkarajan. This is a trio that we often talk about. Of the three, two are taken much more seriously by critics. That is R.K. Narayan. And stereotypically, all Indian university teachers and students know of R.K. Narayan as a person of great wit and humor, and the location that he has really important distinction. So, after Raj Mohan's wife, the novel that really comes and makes its imprint is Swami and the Friend and Kanthapura. That is 1930s. So, 70 years of the last century, and then this. Then another novel comes before us, which is Twilight in Delhi by Ahmad Ali, which is very unique in its experience, the kind of decaying situation that is being developed there. And it was published around the same time. Another very significant novel was published by Desani, G.V. Desani, all about Edge Hatter. It makes a very interesting experiment with the language. So I'm just trying to talk about the major contributions. So two novelists have emerged. Number one, R.K. Narayan, and then after that G.V. Desani, if I look at that like this. Then comes Atiya Hussein's Sunlight on a Broken Column, Zohra and Train to Pakistan in the 50s, Sunlight on the Broken Column in the 1960s, The Day in Shadow and Fire and Mountain in the 70s, and finally in the 80s, Midnight Children. So if you look at the past, you see that there are three marks of Indian fiction. One is represented by R.K. Narayan for the wit and the humor and the creation of a certain kind of a location. The other is all about Edge Hatter, which makes a very good experiment with the language. And the third is Salman Rushdie's A Midnight Children. It again makes experiments with the language, and Indian writing in English comes of age. What he wrote later is a different story altogether. What was the politics behind the writing of literature that he produced, that is a different story. But Midnight Children did a very remarkable job as far as experimenting with the form was concerned, and as far as experimenting with the language was concerned. He was evolving a new language, and therefore he talks of the Biryanization of English. And someone talked about the chutneyfication of English, how you make the language more tasty and it becomes much more palatable. So after that, several stories came, several novelists come before you, and you have a Suitable Boy, for example, that swept the readers. Then his namesake, Kiran Desai, and the whole lot of writers who were emerging. This was the situation of the past. So that is the tradition. I would say, broadly speaking, the tradition of Narayan, tradition of G.V. Desani, and the tradition of Salman Rushdie that the new writers have in their hand. From this, what I did for you is, I surveyed two publishers essentially. One is HarperCollins, major publisher of fiction in India, and the other is Penguin, the major publisher of fiction. These two. And I looked at what kind of fiction they have published in the past 1 decade, 10 years. And I found that there are certain, I tried to find out what is the profile of these authors and what are the thematic concerns of these authors. And briefly, I am going to tell you something about that. Hundreds and hundreds of novels have been published in these 10 years, especially by those two publishers. I have taken only 2 into account, but it runs into thousands. The most important theme that they touch upon is love and romance. Number of novels that you will find related to love and romance. All kinds of romance, in which sometimes you will see erotic fiction also figures and very prominently used. Then there is another category of novels in which you have the young and the old India being represented. That is the transformation, the phase of history that is coming into being and coming into. Then the third area of operation is women's lives and women's predicaments. Look at the trajectory, how it is traveling theme-wise. Women's predicament you also talked about. It's going all over the world, especially after we became much more conscious of gender installation. This has really caught up. So women's predicament, broadly speaking, of an Indian woman, how she is here in her own society and elsewhere in some other society as a diaspora, very rightly talked. Then there are many novels which have city as their location. Actually, most of the novels are city novels. Then there is a category of novels in which you have history, they draw upon history, and they draw upon spirituality. Someone was talking to me recently that what sells the best these days is spirituality and love and crime. This is what the publishers also look for. Spirituality in whatever form. A very wrong understanding of the spirituality or wisdom that one parts for. But that is one thing which sells in the market, and therefore writers are being commissioned to write something which has something to do with religion or spirituality or devotion. And the other that sells very well is sex and romance and some kind of a bargain. So these personal and the social dilemmas are there, friendship, stories of friendship. Then there is a certain group of novels where you have stories about politics and politics. Not many novels, but there are some very interesting novels. A very good number of novelists have written about the diaspora as you talked. And you very rightly said that this is the place where diaspora writing has emerged much more distinctly as it has emerged in Iran. Because our history is a little more different, it goes back to the Myanmar and all the old, say, kind of migrations that have taken place. Some novels have also been written about the world of business and commerce and trade. A small town and village is absent. This is very interesting. हम तो कहते हैं कृषि प्रधान देश है, but village from our fiction is almost absent. Very few novels have been written about the village because village doesn't hold your imagination, it doesn't catch. A very interesting thing is this, that village is present in, for example, Hindi novel, in, for example, Urdu novel, or in, for example, other Indian. What is the reason why it does not really figure in Indian English novel? The reason being that the writer always has an audience in mind, and the audience is English oriented. Therefore, it is a town that is going to attract his attention, the people of the town, the predicaments, the disillusionments of the town, rather than the Premchand's world. It's not going to. Therefore, very few novels have been written about the village, and some novels have also been written about tantric mysteries, tantra, sports, military adventure, one novel even on tsunami. So this is the kind of a trajectory. What I am trying to tell you briefly is this, that what is happening today, and this applies both to the to novels as also to short story, and these are the basic ideas that are I would say that this is very comprehensive representation. Barring here and there certain things missing, for example, village is missing. But where Indian novel or Indian short story really excels is not about the thematic concerns that they express. There are other things which really make it substantial for us to take note of, or to read it or study it much more seriously and critically, and to also talk about this Indian writing in English with other, in comparison with or in association with other literatures, is something else, not only the theme. So, most of Indian writing in English, as far as novel is concerned, is very urban and also is very easy. It is very calculated. They write a very calculated kind of a text. that this text must move like this. And it is not given, say, for example, the reader may not all the time, because he wants to shock and surprise us as well. The author is more interested in creating a sensation. And the author today is much governed by the publisher. And the authors will tell you how their texts are so thoroughly revised by the publishers, the editors at the publishing houses. Now the intention of the editor at the publishing house is one thing, and what you have written is entirely different. So there are authors whom I have met and told that my novel was completely changed and I didn't agree, but ultimately I yielded because I also thought that it is going to sell better. Now this also raises a very important question: where is your art ultimately? And what you wanted to say ultimately, whether it has been said or it hasn't said. It brings to my mind a very interesting question which I often discussed about in the class. Whose poem is this poem called Wasteland? Is it T.S. Eliot's poem or Ezra Pound's poem? Because he wrote it, it was a very, very long poem when he wrote, and Ezra Pound cut it into a very short. So one of the sections ran about 110 lines, which Ezra Pound has made it 7 lines only. Death by water. So whose poem is this? No one talks about this. Everyone talks, this is an Eliot poem, but it is an Eliot poem. But then how much of an Eliot poem is that is a very important point to discuss, which has never been discussed. Except for one critic, C.D. Narasimha once talked about it. Whose poem is this? But this is something which was not. So this is also, so this novel which is being written today by the Indian writer in English is 100% his own writing, or is the editorial department also writing that fiction on behalf of that writer, male or female, and the chosen concerns? Because ultimately what really is a matter of concern, what is the writer, what is the publisher doing today in the Indian scenario? And I would say it is very, very applicable to all other situations, because the publishers are determining the literary scenario today. They are trying to dictate that this is what should be written, and that is why sex, romance and spirituality, because these things sell very fast. Happened to talk to a police officer a few days ago, and he told me that he was a person of literary taste, and he also told me that I also made a survey. After all, he goes to a bookshop very often and is a voracious reader. He said that most of the bookshelves I saw, and since he's in the police, so therefore he was very keen eyes on this, most of the books are on crime, and I asked how many books these books are selling. He said most of the books on crime are sold the best. And the books on romance and love of the lower kind, more erotic, they are sold the best. Now, publishers take their data and the details from the bookshops, from the suppliers, from the agents, and they dictate the writer's market. I'm sorry to use this word market. The writer is standing in the market. Bazaar mein khada hai. The writer is no longer. Therefore, what I'm trying to say is that the whole notion of the author and the text and the reader has changed. The author, this romantic notion of the author is no longer true. The romantic notion of the text is also no longer true. The text is a highly revised and interpolated text. So this is what is happening today. As far as history is concerned, so the major, but in spite of that, I said that Indian English fiction is extremely significant in the sense that it makes two very interesting things. One is that it makes wonderful revisions on language. And I think for this credit goes to two writers of the past, G.V. Desani in All About H. Hatter and Salman Rushdie, who made this, who started this, and after that lots of them have caught really the fancy of the new writers. So language is being experimented with in a big way. The other thing that these Indian writers in English are doing, both in short and long fiction, is the experimentation with the form. The form is completely revised. The narrative goes on in a very catapulted manner, turns upside down, and it doesn't stay in one place. So it brings you very close to fantasy and then again pushes you to reality. So the narrative is a very convoluted narrative. And the reader is challenged. The reader is to face it. The reader has to keep the literature which is being produced apart from thematically as far as technique is concerned is not the kind of literature which you will read, or the fiction which you will read while going to bed and you have a switch next to and you are reading there so that you can sleep fast and then you put it off and then go to sleep. It's not that literature. It shocks you and surprises you and slaps in your face because it's something very disturbing. So very interesting experiments are being made in language as also experimentations with novel. I'll just mention a few novels which have been more talked about. As far as the constructions of history are concerned, Kiran Nagarkar's book has been of great, it has been appreciated very well. called The Cold, a love story for my sister by Jessica Misra. Spiritually phrased, lots of things. Sagarika Ghosh's novel Blind Faith, for example, is there. The life of the youth, Amitabh Bagchi's Above Average is a very interesting novel that you think of. If you think of politics, there is a novel called Damaged by Amrita Kumar and Bikini Murders by Farooq Dondi. Then City Escape, the land of the city and the life of the city, which is Arak in the Afternoon, and Calcutta Exile by Mani Suraiya. In politics, you have a novel which I have just named, Damaged by Amrita Kumar, and Politics and Politicking also. Avenues of the Kings by Sudeep Chakraborty. And World of Business and Commerce Come Back. There is a builder who has also written a novel. He is a builder. And he writes about how his trade and how his money is used or misused, and how in his own profession he is suffering or gaining. So lots of reading. I was just talking about the profile of these authors. The profile of these authors is, as I said, that the notion of the text and the notion of the reader, the writer and the text has changed. What kind of a notion did we have earlier about a writer? The writer used to be a Gariban. Not very. Premchand was a very, very Gariban. Not at all well-fed and didn't have much except for the other great wealth that he had inside. Today's writer is very well-fed. He holds a position. He works in Microsoft and great IT companies. Some academics have also entered into this domain, but they are very well-placed people with lots of, say, material luxury and the material that they have there. So, enviable people, very well brought up and very well placed in their lives, well-connected people. So, this is the kind of profile that they have. They come from all walks of life. You would not imagine a person who is an IT engineer writing a novel, but this is happening today. IT people are writing novels. Engineers of other trade are writing novels. Those who fly airplanes are writing novels. Those who teach in the university are writing novels, to the extent that some students are also writing novels. Young students of class 1st, 2nd, 3rd semester of BA, they have come out with novels. This also brings to question another very interesting thing. Where are these novels published? So you have a market ready also for that. 25,000 rupees and your novel will be published. This is a very alarming kind of a situation. So there are many alarming things that are happening. This is the current scenario that you wanted me to write about, talk about. So I would say that we have to be very critical about receiving it. We cannot stop from the way a text is being conditioned and an author is being directed. This is a matter of concern. But what makes me very happy about is the great variety that Indian writers are producing today. And the great challenge that they are trying to negotiate with the challenges of the time that they are reading. So the new forms, the new techniques that are emerging, the distinction between reality and illusion, new metaphoric constructions are there, completely hugely different kind of a story, very allegorical forms are there, complete say symbolic configurations are there, languages being experimented with. So on the one hand, very positive things are there, but on the other hand, the market is also being is dictating the writer and how the writer is going to. This situation, I'm sure, will not be mitigated so fast. It will keep on maturing. And I understand, I'm not sure, but I think a time will come that people will be much more conscious about their writing and making their claims that this novel will be published like this and in no other way. The survey that I conducted is from two publishers, as I said, HarperCollins and Penguin. And most of the books that I have covered here are from HarperCollins, and in which you have all kinds of material, serious material and also very, say, material which is more popular and let me put it. And this publisher has got the biggest award because they are the big money earners, because their business has gone very high. And this also tells you about other thing, that only fiction is getting popular rather than poetry. Poetry has taken a very, very bad seat. Poets of highest stature, people one has talked about here in Sahitya only, that their manuscripts have been lying with the publishers for the past 5 years. Because poetry will not sell, therefore even if you are a very well-known poet, your book will not be published. and one who is 20 years old and is experimenting with writing, and sometimes he can pay, his novel will be published in a month's time, without editing, with howlers. So this is the current situation, and this is to be watched. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ansuji, for your well-researched paper. And I would now request Fariba Wafi to read.
پروسه داستانی. من 30 و چند سال قبل به جهان ادبیات از منظر رهایی بخش و عدالت‌خواهی آن وارد شدم. سالهای پرهیاهویی بود. مردم در خیابانات تظاهرات می‌کردند، پای می‌کوبیدند و شعار می‌دادند و خواسته هاشون رو با صدای بلند فریاد می‌دادند. ما در مدرسه شاهد کنجکاو تحولات بزرگ بیرون و تغییرات کوچک زندگی خودمون بودیم. هر دو به یک اندازه ناشناخته و گنگ و مبهم اما شوق‌انگیز و پرتلاطم بودند. در حالی که انقلاب به مردم دوربین بزرگی با عدسی تازه برای دوباره دیدن جهان وعده میداد، ادبیات فقط یک چشم ساده برای دیدن تعارف میکرد، یک چشم طبیعی نه تار شده از انباشت‌های قبلی که پلک را سنگین کنه، بلکه چشمی زلال و شفاف که داشتنش انگار جادو میکرد. چشم ساده میتونست در اون شلوغی جنجال آرام ولی با شور و لذت جهان تو رو گسترش بده، با تنوعش رو از یک نواختی کسالت زندگی معمولی برهانه و از خانه و مدرسه و محله تنگ و شهر پرآشوب فراتر ببره. میتونست بار کمبودهای مادی و خلأ عاطفی رو از روی دوش‌های نحیف تو برداره و ناکارآمدی سیستم سیاسی، فرهنگی، اجتماعی و توزیع ناعادلانه ثروت رو نشانه بگیره. ادبیات همچنان صداهایی منتشر میکرد که با صداهای فرهنگ غالب تفاوت داشت. از زخمایی میگفت که در بیرون چندان به چشم نمیخورد، اگر هم دیده میشد اهمیتی نداشت و قرار نبود متوجه آنها بشیم. از زخمایی که ذره ذره روح را میخورند، از حرف زدن آدمها با سایه‌شان میگفت، از ستیز شوهران با حکومت‌های ظالم و سوی زنان، از سرخودگی و در فرو رفتگی مردهای مبارز و از حاشیه نشینان و فقیران میگفت، از تنهایی آدم‌ها، از فلاکتشان، از بخش تاریک روح انسان و از آن روی دیگر جامعه میگفت که شبیه فیلم‌ها، سریال‌ها و تبلیغاتی در تلویزیون می‌بینیم نبود و با همه آنچه که در مدرسه می‌آموختیم فرق داشت و در نصایح پدر و مادرمان اثری از آنها نبود. ادبیات حقایق دیگری نشون داد که رسیدن به آنها توانایی‌های دیگری را از آدم می‌طلبید. نوع حقیقت طلبی، خلاقیت، حساسیت و داشتن شاخص‌های قوی برای جذب رنج‌های اجتماعی و اشتیاق به زندگی عادلانه. اولین داستانی که از من به چاپ رسید داستان یک خانواده بود و تنها 3 شخصیت داشت. پدر خانواده مرده بود. داستان از لحظه‌ای شروع میشه که دختر سر خاک پدر میره و ماجرای چگونه مردنش رو روایت میکنه و در پایان به این نتیجه میرسه که بهترین راه برای پدر مردنه. در این داستان چند صفحه‌ای خواننده شاهد مقاومت پدر در برابر مرگ. اون نمیخواد بمیره، عمیقاً به زندگی دلبسته است، بدجوری ترسیده. با چشما و زبانی که در اثر ضربه مغزی الکن شده از آن 2 نفر دیگر توی اتاق کمک میخواهد، اما هیچ دستی به طرفش دراز نمیشود. رها میشود تا در ترس و تنهایی بمیرد. بعد از 30 و چند سال نوشتن هنوز هم این درونمایه از محوری ترین درونمایه کار منه. در هنگام نوشتن آن داستان 23 سال داشتم و انگار همزمان با نوشتن آن دنبال پاسخ بودم. چرا پدر با آن همه قدرت و نیروی حیات این چنین حقیرانه از زندگی به بیرون پرتاب می شود؟ چرا باید آدمی در چنین موقعیت دردناکی قرار بگیرد؟ ادبیات نه پاسخ سرراست و دم دستی به این سوالها داشت و نه راه حلی که از کانال منطق و استدلال بگذرد، اما پرسشگری را برمی‌انگیخت و گویی با نیروی حس و شعور هستی را به فهمیده شدن فرا می‌خواند. آیا فقر و نکبت بود که زندگی را به بنبست می‌کشاند، به جهنم تبدیلش می‌کرد، جای زندگی رو تعیین می‌کرد، حتی آبروی مرگم می‌برد و چهره‌اش را زشت می‌کرد؟ مواجه شدن با پایان زندگی مرد چنان موقعیت حقارتباری بود که دختر آرزو نمی‌کرد پدر بار دیگر به زندگی بازگردد. از زاویه‌ای که در آن نگاه کرده بودم تنها میشد پدر را دید و فرشته مرگ را که بی‌حوصله بالای سرش نشسته بود و خسته از کش دادن و فسفس کردن مشتری پایش را تکان میداد. از آن زاویه میشد فقط آن دو را درک کرد، یکی که نمیخواست برود و آن دیگری که میخواست ببرد. شاید فشار پرسش‌ها و نیاز جواب به آنها بود که آرام آرام ناچار شدم زاویه دیدم را عوض کنم تا بتوانم به تصویر بزرگتری برسم و همچنین به پرسشی دیگر. چرا چنین شده بود؟ چرا آن دیگران به یاری مرد در حال احتضار نرفتند؟ چه بلایی سرشان آمده بود که چنان مسخ شده و عاری از شفقت و همدردی بر جای مانده بودند؟ در حقیقت انتخاب دقیق زاویه دید همواره دغدغه من بوده و هست. مهم بود که دوربین را کجا بگذاری و از کدام نقطه به زندگی بنگری. با تکان جزئی آن و با فاصله‌ای که ایجاد می‌کرد می‌توانستی چیزهایی را در روشنایی ببینی و چیزهایی را در سایه. در این جابجایی نامحسوس زاویه عجیب است که همین حرکت کند و قطعی سالها طول کشید. توانستم مادر خانواده را ببینم، مادری که در فرهنگ ما قرار بود بهش زیر پایش باشد، اما حتی تصور درستی از آن نداشت و در جهنمی واقعی دست و پا میزد. اما من چنان جذب مرگ آن پهلوان اسطوره‌ای شده بودم که مادر به کل از یادم رفته بود. مادر خانواده چرا به کمک پدر نرفته بود؟ مادر چرا گذاشته بود پدر با چنان خشونتی در آن تنهایی بمیرد؟ شروع کردم به دیدن مادرهای زندگیم و این همزمان بود با مادر شدن خودم. شروع کردم به دیدن و حس کردن زنهایی که خاموش میآیند و خاموش میروند و کسی صدایشان را نمیشنود. صداهای سرکوب شده و ترس خودشان را شنیدم. به پچ‌پچ‌ها و رازهایشان گوش سپردم. اما چیزهایی که می‌دیدم در ادبیاتی که می‌خواندم نبود. اغلب زن‌هایی که تا به آن روز در ادبیات معاصر ما ظاهر شده بودند یا لک‌بازه بودند یا اسیری، یا در لفافه عشق افلاطونی بودند یا در حواشی جامعه لک‌شده، یا اسطوره‌ای بودند یا قربانی. پس این زن‌های معمولی دور بر من کجا بودند؟ زن‌های خانه‌دار، دانشجو، کارگر، فروشنده، زن‌هایی که در تضاد مدرنیته و سنت سردرگم و آشفته مانده بودند. گویا کمتر چیزی از این نسل جدید زن‌های قوی با مطالبات جدید و ادبیات تبدیل شده بود. کمتر چیزی از آنها تا حد دیده شدن و لمس شدن در ادبیات بالا آمده بود. نیاز به بیانگری بعد از انقلاب 57 شدت گرفت. حضور زنها در جامعه، در حیات اجتماعی، در مدارس، به دانشگاه‌ها و عرصه‌های کار افزایش یافت و یک دهه بعد ادبیات داستانی ایران جان تازه‌ای پیدا کرد. زنان نویسنده که در ابتدا تعدادشان به انگشتان دست هم نمی‌رسید، همزمان با اقبال آثارشان از طرف مخاطبان تکثیر شدند و نوشتن که تا آن موقع اغلب در انحصار طبقات بالا بود، به سرعت به لایه‌های میانی جامعه تسری پیدا کرد. نیاز به شناخت و جستجوی هویت نویسنده‌های نسل جدید را وارد کارزار کرد و کمک کرد تا با رویکرد تازه‌ای به رابطه زندگی ادبیات بپردازند. جریانی آغاز شد که همچنان ادامه دارد. شما می‌توانید صدای زن راننده زن، صدای دانشجو، مهندس، آرایشگر، فقیر، ثروتمند، ماجراجو، زن منفعل و صدای قشرهای مختلف جامعه را در ادبیات معاصر ایران بشنوید. اگر زمانی ادبیات پر از صدای قربانی‌ها بود، اگر نویسنده رسالت خود می‌دید صدای رنج و ستم آنها را برساند، حالا تقاضای دیگری داشت. فرم می‌خواست و نگاه تازه، ناله نمی‌خواست. نسلی که بعدتر آمدند خواهان قصه‌های سوزناک قربانیان و صدای نسل سوخته نبودند. نویسنده ناچار بود پا به پای روزگارش پیش برود، از ناله کردن دست بردارد و به فرم‌های زبانی متنوعی مجهز شود تا بتواند از تجربه‌های تازه بگوید. من نیز به نوبه خود داشتم زاویه نگاهم را از چهره مادر به صورت دختر که راوی داستان با ما بود می‌چرخاندم. دختر شاهد مرگ پدر و نگاه خالی مادر بود. این بار باید دختر زبان می‌گشود تا می‌توانستیم تصویر کاملی از آنچه در بطن داستان ما می‌گذشت به دست بیاوریم. دختر فقط شاهد ساده زندگی پدر و مادرش نبود، یا حتی شاهد ساده معمای بیرحمی مادر و مرگ مظلومانه پدر. دختر ناچار بود با خودش هم مواجه بشود، خودش را هم ببیند. چرا کاری نکرده بود و فقط تماشا کرده بود؟ چرا آنقدر گیج شده بود؟ چرا نرفته بود دست پدر را بگیرد تا آنقدر نترسد؟ چرا نخواسته بود مادر را آرام کند؟ چرا فکر کرده بود قدرت هیچ کدام از این کارها را ندارد؟ چطور میتوانست کرختی منزجر کننده ناشی از ترس را توجیه کند؟ دختر نیاز داشت پیچیدگی روابط را درک کند. قرار بود با همان چشمی که ادبیات ارزانی کرده بود بار دیگر به این زندگی نگاه شود. پدر خانواده، مادر خانواده و مهمتر از آن دختر جوان. دختر نمیخواست همچون پدر بمیرد یا همچون مادر که بعد از مرگ پدر گریه‌های دروغین سر داده بود. آیا دروغین بود؟ بعد از 30 و چند سال داستان دیگری نوشتم. این بار 52 سال داشتم. در این داستان دختر می‌رود که مادر خود را در آغوش بگیرد و ببوسد. قرار است برخلاف صحنه مرگ غم‌انگیز پدر و انگار به جبران همه عواطف دره شده رابطه‌ای پر از حس‌های عاطفی و معنادار خلق شود. مادر پیر است و دختر پا به میانسالی گذاشته است. آنها هر دو از روزهای سخت عبور کردند و تجربه زیستی کلانی پشت سر دارند. ناچار شدم برای بهتر دیدن از میان درک نامطمئن و کلمه‌های محو و حافظه لرزان دخترهایی که دیگر زن‌های حاملی بودند به کودکیشان و به سالهای نوجوانی و جوانیشان بروم. در این سفر به صدها اجبار زندگیشان برخوردم، به آشناییشان به انتخاب شدن و به بیگانگیشان از انتخاب کردن، به آزاری که از اطرافیان دیده بودند و صدایشان در نیامده بود، به رویاها و استعدادهای تلف شده و حسرت‌هاشان، به مادر شدنشان، به احساس گناه و ترس از ناکافی بودنشان، به خشونت‌هایی که خود بر دیگران روا داشته بودند، به حال پایان ناپذیر و بی‌مزد شستن و پختن و دوختنشان، به عشق‌های رنگ بافته‌شان، به خیانت‌هایی که دیده بودند و به اعتماد به نفس لطمه دیده و نادیده گرفتن شدن‌هاشان و به تلاشی که برای ارتقای خود و برای رسیدن به خودباوری و چشیدن طعم توصیف ناپذیر آن می‌کردند. مکان داستان یک اتاق است و شخصیت‌ها فقط 2 نفرند، مادر و دختر. پدر خانواده و چگونگی مرگش از یاد رفته است، اما اینجا هر دو زنده‌اند و دوست ندارند تنها باشند. دوست دارند در موقعیت غرورانگیز و دست کم محبت آمیزی باشند. دختر هیجان زده است و با نیت در آغوش گرفتن مادر پیرش شبانه ماشین گرفته و با شتاب خودش را به خانه مادر رسانده، مبادا که فرشته مرگ زودتر از اون مادرش را در آغوش بگیرد. بالاخره روبروی مادر می‌ایستد و در حرکتی ناشیانه هم می‌شود که او را در آغوش بگیرد، اما حرکت تمرین نشده او در موقعیت طنزآلود و در مواجهه با واکنش خشک مادر ناکام می‌ماند. دختر در را پشت سرش می‌بندد و پا به خیابان می‌گذارد و من به دنبال او راه می‌افتم و در فکرم که چه حرکت و چرخش خلاقانه دیگری می‌تواند امکانات تازه‌ای از دیدن و حس کردن را به جهان این داستان سرازیر کند. For giving us glimpse of story writing in Iran, and now I think I will request the chairperson for any questions to be from the.
Well, it looks like that I have to sum up the session. I think we had a very interesting account about Indian writing in the past decade. I just told Professor Rahman that what he was talking about, the Indian publication of story writing in India looks so much similar to the situation in Iran. So many of these global issues are similar, and I think that we could learn from each other's experiences and we develop a better strategy for our literatures as well as from our side, Iranian and the Indian one. We also had a very interesting account of a writer herself about how she's writing and how she developed her attitude towards writing. I don't know how much you managed to read the PowerPoint for the people who do not know Persian. because the PowerPoint was just a bit, the fonts were too small to read perhaps, but I just would like to say a few words about what Ms. Wafi told us. She tried to explain how a writer as a woman has developed her vision through a few decades. Now this development is done internally and externally. Society has changed and she has changed as well. And how she develops this new vision of a woman, how her characters in a way could represent different parts, different aspects of the dilemmas that an Iranian woman faces, different situations. And I would just tell you that the language was perfect. It in itself was a literary piece as far as I'm concerned. And I hope that it would be published in English somewhere here if we could. I don't want to take much of your time. Hopefully in the afternoon we're going to have a round table discussion, and then perhaps we could explore more themes of that were discussed in the morning and also in the afternoon panel. I think that that sums up the morning session. It's 1:30. I don't know how much time we have for lunch. Yeah, so we... Okay, so we have 1 hour for lunch. So, and we will meet here at 2:30 for the afternoon session and also the round table discussion. Thank you very much.